Monday. Joining me live now is Liberal Senator Jane Hume. Jane, thanks so much for your time. Going into this, can you tell us or give us an idea where people are at?
Laura, the party room is far more united than it is divided. I think that's a really important place to start. We all agree that emissions need to come down, and we all agree that Labor's policy is not only not bringing emissions down, but it's driving electricity prices up, and that we can't continue on this ideological path that will continue to put businesses out of business and increase electricity bills for households. They've already gone up by 40% just in 3 years alone. That's entirely unsustainable. There is a better way, and we all agree on that. There's an Australian way to getting to a lower. There's an Australian way to getting to a lower emissions future, as well as bringing electricity prices down. We have to make sure that we bring more gas into the system, that we open up, lift the moratorium on nuclear energy to bring in new technologies, that we remove the corporate welfare, because there's an awful lot of that going on, taxpayer money being spent on proven technologies to help corporations get to their net zero target, not the country get to its. And most importantly, we need to make sure that there is social licence and community consultation for a continued renewables rollout. We want to see more renewables in the system, but not at any cost, and certainly not at the cost of our regional rural communities that are now being blanketed in solar farms that are taking up arable land and transmission towers that are causing more environmental damage potentially than they are doing good. There is a better way. We can lower emissions and reduce electricity prices. We can't do that with a Labor government. So how do we get a coalition government elected? In order to do that, we need to make sure that we have a credible climate policy.
OK, credible climate policy, the key phrase here, absolutely going into this. So what is credible? What are the new targets? Because that's what the Australian people want to see. Will we have something similar to the Nats, like around a 50% renewable target, and gas, coal propped up for decades to come, and nuclear?
There's an energy pathway to bringing down energy prices, electricity prices, but we also need to make sure that there is a credible climate policy that runs alongside of that, that comes with reducing emissions. Now, I know that the contention here is over those words, the words net zero. More than 50% of the Australian population have said that a credible climate policy is a euphemism for net zero. They want to see the coalition stick with a net zero target, but not at any cost. That's the pathway that we need to find, a uniquely Australian way to get there. It's not impossible. Lowering emissions and lowering electricity prices are not mutually exclusive. That's what we're going to discuss today in the party room.
So what's your new three-word slogan? Cheap and clean?
We don't need a new three-word slogan, but it isn't impossible to have cleaner energy, to lower emissions, to have a reliable grid and also a credible climate policy. And that's exactly what we want to see.
I get the sentiment and the politics here, absolutely, but there's not a lot of intellectual rigour in the alternative that you're offering at the moment. We're not being offered any independent modelling. We're not being offered any, concrete alternative here. Jane, we've spoken about this so often, but don't you run into a bit of danger here? You scrap net zero because you say it's the cheaper way to do it, and the current system is driving up electricity prices. But where's the evidence that just dropping net zero will bring down prices?
Well, we know that dropping net zero, should the party room decide that it wanted to ditch the phrase net zero today, that's not going to bring down electricity prices immediately, and Australians should know that. The only way you're going to bring down electricity prices is if you change your pathway to lowering emissions. That we can do, but we can only do that from government. The only way to return to government is to make sure that we have a credible climate policy that voters agree with, as well as a credible energy policy that will bring down energy prices. That can be done. That can be done. It just can't be done under Labor.
OK, so there's a few moderates, Andrew Bragg among them, talking about, quitting essentially if the party does dump net zero. How many people do you think are in a similar situation to him?
I'm not going to speculate on that. And in fact, I personally think that the best place that you can affect change is if you're in the room where decisions are made. So the most important thing is that we have that, diversity of views in the room and that we come to a sensible outcome that will lower emissions, that will lower electricity prices, and will make sure that we appeal to those voters that we have lost on the journey. Let's face it, even coalition voters will say that our first obligation is to return to government. And we do that by making sure that we demonstrate credibility to our voters. Credibility on both energy prices and energy policy, as well as climate policy. Because unless we can demonstrate credible climate policy, people will not even have us on their electoral radar. And that's really important. In order to find the pathway back, in order to make sure that those rural and regional areas aren't blanketed in solar farms or transmission wires that don't have the social licence or the community consultation, we have to return a coalition government. We can't return a coalition government unless we have a policy that appeals not just to those regional and rural seats, but to the provincial, to the peri-urban and the urban seats as well.
But if you do abandon net zero, which it certainly seems like the party is on the cusp of doing, if the priority is to keep the coalition together, and by various public comments from many of your colleagues, you don't just abandon net zero, don't you abandon hundreds of businesses and corporations in Australia that have been working under that framework because they thought it was bipartisan?
Well, I think this is a nonsense because even the National Party have said that they want to stay in the Paris Agreement and meet their international obligations. Now, to be honest, that is part of the net zero journey. Paris says that we want to make sure that we maintain global temperatures between 2% and 1% rises by 2050. So that net zero obligation or objective is a part of that.
Hang on, but the whole point of Paris, hang on, Jane, the whole point of Paris was to bring countries into the tent like China, and I understand that they're not actually doing much of the heavy lifting, absolutely, when it comes to their pollution per capita. But that being said, Paris was a binding agreement. That's the whole point of it, that countries like ours signed up and it was binding.
It is. It's a binding agreement. Yeah. That said, the Labor government took it a step further. They then legislated a target. Now, I think that's crazy. We don't legislate targets to reduce debt. We don't legislate targets to bring the budget back into balance. Why would we legislate an emissions target? That said, I do think that there is a good opportunity now to bring emissions targets as well as energy abundance, energy mix, energy prices into that budgeting process.
I don't really understand what that would mean, though. How do you drop, net zero, but still stay signed up to Paris, which is a binding agreement?
Well, this is the thing. Even countries like China and like India have net zero emissions targets. They might have them at different timeframes. Australia can achieve a net zero future. There is no doubt about that. Technology is likely to get us there. 25 years ago, I didn't have an iPhone in my pocket. I had a Nokia 3110 that played Tetris, and that was about it. Imagine the technology that's going to get us to a net zero future in 25 years' time. Yeah. But in the meantime, there are some terrific opportunities to reduce emissions as well as reduce energy prices. We just have to make sure that we put ourselves on a different trajectory to the one that Labor has put us on, which is an ideological trajectory that is about a renewables-only approach that is blanketing our countryside with renewable energy projects that simply don't have the social licence and are pushing up energy prices so that we're seeing industry go out of business, like Tomago Aluminium or Oceana Glass or Intertech Pivot in fertiliser or Kinos in plastics. These big manufacturing firms are going out of business because of Labor's high energy prices. 1,400 manufacturing firms have gone out of business in the last 3 years alone. Okay. That's entirely unsustainable. In the meantime, household energy bills have gone up by nearly 40%. Anybody that's experienced less than that is only because of government subsidies, taxpayer money being recycled and redistributed to try and bring down energy prices artificially. That is entirely unsustainable. There's a better way. Our job today is to find that better way, forge a uniquely Australian way, a uniquely Australian path to lower energy prices, lower emissions and a more reliable grid.
Jane, always good to talk to you. Let's speak again between now and Sunday.
You too.